The judge froze. It's her. No one knew who I was until that day. They tried to declare me unfit and take everything, but a ledger on Route 14 changed the law of our house. Stay, because the gavel wasn't the only thing that fell. When I walked into the county courthouse that morning, the ocean air still clung to my coat, and my palms smelled faintly of dish soap from the mug I'd washed twice before leaving, as if suds could steady nerves. My daughter, Lila, was already seated at the petitioner's table with her husband, Trent. She rolled her eyes in a way I recognized from when she was 16 and whispered something I didn't catch, but I felt the aim of it land between my shoulder blades like a pebble in a shoe. I looked up at the bench, ready to anchor myself on the shape of a stranger's face, and saw the judge freeze. His pen stopped halfway through a stroke. He went perfectly still, the kind of still that makes other people hold their breath without knowing why. He took off his glasses, blinked as if clearing smoke, and murmured into the hush he'd created. It's her. The room went quiet enough that I could hear the radiator tick and the long, slow inhale of the bailiff as he stepped closer to the bench. A few people leaned forward. I didn't move. I didn't know what recognition I'd walked into. I only knew the judge wasn't looking at the file in front of him. He was looking straight at me as if I had been walking toward that gaze for 40 years and reached it right then. No one else in the courtroom had any idea who I really was until that moment. That hearing would change everything, but it wasn't where my story began. My name is Evelyn May Carter. Around Harbor Point, most folks call me Evie. I'm 71 years old, and until a few months ago, I was the Route 14 lady with hydrangeas in the front window and a blue enamel mug that chipped so long ago you couldn't remember it any other way. I carried other people's letters for 38 years and never once expected mine would carry me. Most mornings since I retired, I ended up in the kitchen before the sun got all the way over the water, standing in my house slippers on the same scuffed square of linoleum where the coffee maker burbled and the smell of fresh grounds made the world seem honest. I'd pour into that blue mug and wrap both hands around its familiar heat. I'd water the basil on the sill and then the hydrangeas, salt-sprayed and stubborn, and check the weather through the old wood frame. I'd straighten the stack of postcards I never mailed, but liked to read when the house was quiet. The Grand Canyon wishing me were there, a lobster with sunglasses reminding me to pinch pennies, a real lighthouse with a fake seagull perched too perfectly on the railing. On work days, when work was still mine, I used to lace up boots at the table and kiss Harold on the cheek if he was still home, then step into the same morning light that every fisherman on our street had already met. There's a sound to coastal mornings you don't forget, even years later. The low talk of engines warming, the creak of rope, the gull who wants to be the town crier. Those sounds trailed me on my route like well-behaved dogs. People think a mail carrier drops envelopes and moves on, but it's listening too. You learn who keeps a porch light on when grief won't let them sleep, who buys stamps in person to speak to you for 2 extra minutes, who sends themselves postcards for courage and puts them in their own mailbox with no address, just a date. The day after Harold died, I still made coffee in that mug. The day after that, I watered the hydrangeas. Some days, routines keep you from falling through the floor. Other days, they make you notice the new drop to the room. I had thought that after Harold passed, Lila would come by more. We'd make chowder the right way, no flour to thicken, just patience. But grief doesn't always pull people closer. Sometimes it leaves a draft people step away from because it feels like getting cold. We went from talking about whether the chowder had enough clam to whether I had enough sense, in a way that made both of us wrong. The gray Thursday, the humiliation began. I'd simmered chicken and dumplings in the cast iron the way Lila liked when she was 8. The dumplings a little ragged around the edges, because I never could bring myself to make them perfect. I'd set the table even though it was just the 3 of us and put a sprig of rosemary in a jelly jar because it made the kitchen smell like someone thought ahead. They walked in like people who didn't need an invitation. Trent went directly to Harold's chair. the one every woman knows isn't just a chair when the body that warmed it is gone and flopped down like it came with him. He thumbed the TV on without asking. Lila hovered by the counter the way she did when she wasn't sure whether to sit in the old family place or next to the life she'd chosen. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, and I knew the talk we needed to have had already been finished without me. "This house is too big," she went on, trying to sound practical instead of scared. "We found a spot for you at Seaside Oaks." "It's nice, really nice. Activities, people your age, a nurse on call all the time." She kept her eyes on the rosemary jar because mine were too full. You always know when someone says "we" and means he. "This is our home," I said, because every wall in that kitchen had years on it with our names. "Your father put up those shelves. You broke that tile with your roller skates when you were 10. We patched it with glue and pretended not to notice the crack. Memories live in the heart, Mom, not on the walls," she said, and she didn't hear how cold the sentence sounded because she needed it to sound that way to carry it. Trent didn't look over. He was already measuring the room with his eyes. "We'll handle the paperwork," he said, toothy around his own importance. "You just sign." I'm not a fool. I know when a line has been flung and when you're the fish someone thinks won't fight. I said I needed time. They left the dumplings untouched. The rosemary drooped like it had been cut for nothing. The days after that were a humiliation run. Strangers came with a clipboard and a measuring tape and talked about my kitchen like a room in a flyer. Trent called me a liability as if the word itself were evidence. Lila boxed things I had to put a name to or lose. She put my mother's locket in a bag marked "to secure," and the china I never used because life kept happening on mismatched plates in a box with a number written in thick marker. When she reached for Harold's service watch, scratched face, band replaced twice, a thing that lived on his wrist and then on the dresser but always belonged to a pulse. I made a sound I hadn't heard from myself before, quiet and raw. "Safer in a deposit box," she said. "Things get lost when you move. They get lost when you decide they aren't needed," I said. I don't know if she heard me. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table and turned over postcards instead. There was one from Yellowstone. On the back, in a neat hand, the sender had written, "Wish you were here." I held it like an answer, then put it down like a joke. "I am," I said aloud to no one. "I'm right here." On Sunday, while they were helping me pack, I went out to Harold's old workbench in the shed. Maybe I was looking for something that smelled like him. Sawdust and hand soap and the faint metal of the nails he saved in Folgers cans. There was a drawer that never gave. It had jammed years ago, as if it had decided withholding was a virtue. It opened under my hand with one honest tug like it had been waiting on me all that time, and had finally made peace with being seen. Inside were the papers men keep when they don't tell you everything to avoid making you worry. Tax notices, a map with circles on places I knew by smell, a folded manila envelope with our friend Nate Bloom's handwriting on it. Nate had been Harold's fishing buddy and Harbor Point's kindest attorney. Cancer took him 2 springs ago. He used to bring me rogue blueberries and tell me the law had a good heart if you coaxed it. The envelope held a leather notebook, sun-soft and scuffed smooth. On the first page, Nate had written in careful block letters, "Ledger Route 14. I turned pages and felt a timeline wake up in my bones. This wasn't a ledger like a cold list. It was a map of quiet decisions. Over years, with Nate's guidance and Harold's thrift, pennies saved in jars, Sundays spent fixing instead of buying, we had acquired a peculiar little orchard of rights and obligations. There were tax lien certificates on 3 distressed properties off the ridge, the kind we bought with letters before we ever bought them with money. We had offered payment plans, forgiven interest when someone's mother got sick. Some paid, some didn't, and the law put a ribbon on what kindness couldn't untie. There was an old ground lease under a row of Bayside storefronts, 30-year term from a time when Harbor Point was sleepy, now the kind of paper men like Trent wore new suits over. There was a limited partnership interest in North Key Commons, the very complex where Trent had bragged about consulting and where tenants had complained to me about stairwells never fixed, and a laundry room sign that said out of order so long it became decoration. The partnership agreement spelled out that a property manager could be removed for cause by a simple majority if someone called the vote. Between the legalese, Nate had tucked in a letter dated 6 months before he died. Evie, if you've pulled this out, either you're cleaning the drawer Harold meant to fix or you need an anchor. You've been an anchor to more people than know it. When I was 10 and our house caught fire, I learned there are 2 kinds of doors. There are doors that open because they're made to, and there are doors that open because someone who sees straight knows you're on the other side. You've always been the second kind for this town. If you ever need to stand your ground, this ledger proves you've already been doing it for everyone else. Use it kindly, but use it. Nate. I set the ledger down and listened to the ocean breathe in and out. For the first time since they walked into my kitchen like inspectors, I felt the floor under me again. I didn't know yet what would happen in court or at the partnership or in my daughter's heart. I only knew that power kept quiet doesn't mean power isn't there. Sometimes you have to read it into being. On Monday morning, Trent arrived with movers, the kind of men who have learned to apologize with their eyes. Lila stood behind them and didn't look at me. The smell of industrial tape burned the air. The lead mover said, "Ma'am?" in a gentle voice, waiting for a direction. I sat in Harold's chair with my blue mug and said, "Nothing leaves this house today." Trent laughed like a man who thinks the next steps are as inevitable as gravity. "You don't have a choice," he said. He enjoyed that sentence because he'd practiced it. "You're right," I said, setting the mug down. "Neither do you." I put the ledger on the table beside the notarized page I'd spent the night marking up with Marisol on the phone, while she listened and told me which parts needed highlighting and which parts needed patience. The partnership had rules and I had votes. By the agreement of North Key Commons, mismanagement and self-dealing removed the property manager with a simple majority. Partners had been called. Partners had voted. Effective immediately, the contract with Hayes Property Services was terminated. I slid the page across the table to Trent and watched his eyes move over words he believed didn't apply to him. He turned a particular kind of pale I've seen on men who find out the thing they thought was theirs is community property. "You can't," he started. "I can," I said, and it startled us both how calm I sounded. And I did. "You'll receive formal notice by noon." "Mom," Lila said, my name for her lost for a second under the way she said it. "What is this?" Her voice trembled, not because she didn't understand, but because she did. "Just the truth catching up," I said, not unkindly. "Would you like coffee?" I turned to the movers. "How about you?" "I can't fault you for coming to do your job, but nothing here is moving today." They left with paper cups and grateful nods. Trent's mask slipped. The room felt taller for a moment, as if a ceiling had lifted. He leaned in close the way bullies misread proximity for power. "We'll file for guardianship today," he said. "Ex parte. Temporary, at first. You won't touch a checkbook again." I looked at my daughter and saw how her face pinched when she was being held between a lie and a truth. "Then I'll see you in court," I said. "Bring your receipts, son." He hated the word son because it put him in the right place in my sentence. He picked up his coat with more force than fabric deserved and stormed out down the walk where Harold had once chalked hopscotch squares for a laughing 8-year-old. He filed by Wednesday. The petition for temporary guardianship arrived in an envelope I would have carried to someone else once, a document dressed as care and padded with convenience. It mentioned forgetfulness, and stovetop left on, and mail left unopened, and the kind of anecdotes men collect about careful women when they want those women to sound like a danger to themselves. It attached 3 photographs of my old stove, one of which showed the pilot light that has glowed since 1992, as if a patient flame were proof that I couldn't be trusted with my own matches. I called Marisol Vega and read the first paragraph while she listened without interrupting. Marisol used to clerk for a judge in Portland and came back to Harbor Point after her mother fell ill. She had a way of asking a question that didn't feel like an exam and wore her hair in a bun, even on Saturdays, which made the teenage cashiers at the market stand a little straighter when she checked out. "We'll need a neuropsych eval for you, Evie," she said when I finished, "and a paper trail. If truth had feet, it would run through receipts. I carried paper my whole life," I told her. "It's time it carried me." We gathered. I made appointments. Dr. Kumar at the clinic the next town over for the memory tests I resented until I didn't. I walked Mrs. Dobson from next door back to her oxygen machine and asked if she'd be willing to tell a judge the truth, which is different from asking if she would help, and she said she would because she owed me 24 porch lights. I called the tenants at North Key, whose names I learned over years of handing them catalogs for things they couldn't afford and birthday cards that always arrived late. I wrote down the exact dates the laundry room was broken and how long the light flickered in the stairwell. I saw the ledger differently now, not as a weapon, but as a witness. I expected Lila to call and yell or to call and cry. She texted instead just after midnight when the house made the sounds an old house makes, once everyone realizes it survived the day. "Can we talk alone?" she wrote. She came by the next afternoon and stood at the sink with her hands on the counter, like she was steadying herself at sea. "He says you're turning me against him," she said without looking up. "I'm asking you to stand with yourself," I said. "Sometimes those look the same from where he stands." She closed her eyes for a second, and I saw the girl who used to stand just like that after riding her bike too fast down the hill and realizing stopping required both feet and luck. "He told me you forgot the stove." "Tell me honestly," I said. "Are you safe?" She nodded. It wasn't the immediate nod I wanted, the kind you want so you can file fear away. It was slower and sadder, which is the kind that lands. "Can you tell the truth under oath?" I asked. She pressed her lips together and reached up to touch her own hair the way she used to when she had to read aloud in class. "I don't know," she said. She put a hand low on her stomach, and I realized without her telling me there was a second heartbeat in that room. She hadn't shared the news. She didn't have to. Mothers know when something new moves the air around their child. "Then find out," I said softly, "for your child." Harbor Point's courthouse sits 2 blocks back from the bay and 3 feet above whatever cigarette smoke and gossip drift by. The steps are stone, worn shallow in the middle, polished deeper at the edges by people who stick to what's safe. We climb them on the day of the hearing under a sky the color of pewter. The hallway inside smelled like floor polish, photocopier heat, and nerves. A bulletin board listed meetings no one wanted to attend, and a bake sale everyone forgot to support until the brownies were gone. Trent was there already in a suit that looked rented. His lawyer had north of Boston hair and the kind of briefcase a man buys himself when he wants to look like the kind of man who doesn't need to ask his wife how much it costs. He smirked at me without showing his teeth. Marisol squeezed my elbow. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I said, which is what people say when they've already done the brave part and the rest is just walking into a room. The judge took the bench. The bailiff called the case number. We stood because we were supposed to and sat when told. Trent's lawyer spoke first. He held up a printout of my stove like it proved anything you couldn't smell. He said confusion and erratic and manipulation with practiced sorrow. He implied my friend Nate, dead and decent, was a ghost whose hand still tried to move a pen. He said elder care, as if the words made him kind. Marisol stood like a surgeon whose instruments were sharpened before dawn. She didn't pound. She placed. She showed Dr. Kumar's report. Cognitive testing within normal range, attention intact, memory sharp enough to carve initials. She laid out the bank statements. Regular deposits, no erratic withdrawals, donations to the volunteer fire company every January because fires don't care what month it is. She entered the partnership documents, the ground lease, the notice of removal for cause. When she said self-dealing, Trent blinked without meaning to. Then the judge looked at me. He took his glasses off as if they'd blurred something memory brought into focus. "Mrs. Carter," he said slowly, Is your full name Evelyn May Carter? Yes, Your Honor, I said. He let out a breath like a wave breaking. When I was 10, he said, our trailer caught fire out on the ridge. The road washed out the week before. The volunteer engine was late. A mail carrier kicked our door twice and dragged my sister and me out before the propane tank blew. The paper got her name wrong. I've looked for her without knowing how you look for someone who saved your life when you still believed you were the main character in it. His voice did something then, got thinner and stronger at the same time. It's her. The courtroom went still. Lila turned to me and saw something true that wasn't about her. Trent looked like he'd bitten through his own cheek. The judge straightened his shoulders and set his pen down. For the record, he said, I am disclosing a personal history that may bear on perception. Counsel, do you seek recusal? Trent's attorney misunderstood the moment in a way that told me he was thinking about appeals instead of people. No, Your Honor, he said, because he thought a deferential answer would please a man whose life he had never read about on the back page of a small paper. No objection, Marisol said, eyes on the law, not on the story. Then we proceed, the judge said, on the evidence. It matters that he said that. It matters that he wanted to make sure this wasn't luck pretending to be justice. It matters that he could have stepped down and didn't, because fairness isn't about the absence of feeling. It's about whether you let feeling climb the bench with you. Evidence came like music when played by the right hands. Mrs. Dobson wheeled herself up and raised her hand to swear, and then put it down on the rail and said, She's the one who notices my porch light when I forget it, Your Honor. A young tenant from North Key, hair buzzed because he couldn't afford shampoo last winter, testified that a stairwell repair had been invoiced 3 times and stapled to a week when the man hired never set foot on the property. Dr. Kumar explained the difference between normal senior moments and dangerous cognitive decline without making the room feel like a test. Marisol walked her through attention and recall, and how I'd asked to take a part of the exam twice because I thought I should do it better. People laughed softly, not at me, with me. Lila walked to the stand like she had to learn a new language with her knees. She stared at the oath like it might bite and then looked at me. Her voice was thin but true. He told me to box my mother's life up and call it love, she said. He told me she was a danger to herself. She isn't. He is a danger to us. Her hand went to her stomach without her permission, and you could feel the truth drop through the room to where the floor is supposed to be. Lila, Trent blurted, stop. His voice was too loud for a place that requires people to listen. The bailiff took a half step closer and didn't have to do more than that. The judge took a beat to let quiet do its work. Then he ruled. He denied the petition for guardianship, both temporary and permanent, finding insufficient evidence of incapacity and strong evidence of independence. He issued a protective order against harassment for me and for Lila, because words leave bruises you can't photograph. He referred the property management issues to the partnership's counsel and noted that nothing in his order precluded civil action by the partnership for breach of duty. He awarded attorney's fees in part. He looked at me last. Mrs. Carter, he said, and the room made space for it. Thank you for what you did a lifetime ago. Today is about law, not luck. On the law, you win. The sound of the gavel wasn't loud. It traveled. On the steps outside, the air tasted like rain and metal. Lila stood with her coat collar up, shaking, the kind of shaking that isn't cold but looks like it. She looked at me and tried to say mother and mom at the same time and ended up saying both wrong. Can I come home? She whispered. Just for a while. I need a place where the floor is the floor. Home is a thing we rebuild, I said. You can start measuring. Then, because conditions aren't the same as kindness, but they sometimes hold hands, I added, there will be rules. Trent called from the bottom of the steps, all muscle, no aim. You think this is over? He said. It's exactly as over as the paperwork says. Marisol answered, already dialing the partnership administrator because action without gloat is the most satisfying kind. He backed away down the sidewalk like a man practicing a face he could live with. Repair is a verb. Rage burns fast, repair sands, measures, fits. Lila slept in her old room the first night and kept her door cracked open the way she used to when thunder made her brave and scared at once. The second night, she closed it because she realized she needed to learn the new sounds of safety. The first week, she washed her plate without me asking and wiped the counter even where spills didn't show. She picked a hydrangea blossom that had browned on one side and put it in a jelly jar anyway, because sometimes you have to choose beauty on purpose. We sat at the table with the blue mug between us. She held it without drinking. "I should have told you," she said. "You are telling me now," I said. "The next right thing is never smaller because it's late." She learned to fix the kitchen drawer Harold always meant to fix, watching a video on her phone and swearing under her breath, and then apologizing to the empty room. She went to the clinic and let Dr. Kumar listen to the small heartbeat inside her. She bought prenatal vitamins even though the jar looked like something someone else should take. She cried in the car once and came in with a brave face, and I let her have it because the thing about brave faces is that they work better when someone sees around them and pretends not to. She told me she was sorry every morning for a week and then started saying thank you instead. People ask me if Trent tried to come around. He did. He came to the lobby at North Key one afternoon with his shirt untucked and a bottle cap imprint on his palm and yelled at the building manager, a kid named Theo, who called me ma'am even when he didn't need to. "That crazy old lady kidnapped my wife," Trent said, making sure to raise his voice where the security camera could hear it. "Call the cops." "Good afternoon," I said, like a person whose manners are a weapon when she needs them. He turned so fast he almost fell. The manager's hand shook near the phone. "You give me back my wife," he said. "Lila is exactly where she wants to be," I replied. "And if you don't leave my property immediately, I'll be the one calling the police." "This isn't your property," he spat. I put the call to the partnership office on speaker. "Hi, this is Evie," I said when Anita picked up. "Would you please confirm for Mr. Hayes that North Key Commons is owned by the partnership and that the partnership removed his company for cause?" Anita is one of those women whose competence makes even angry men correct their grammar. "That is correct," she said, crisp as clean paper. "Mr. Hayes, you were notified via certified mail and email. We have the delivery confirmation and the read receipt." Trent glared at the phone as if technology itself had betrayed him. He left without making the scene he'd rehearsed. Men like him don't always know what to do with women who read their lines first. We wrote letters, not to gloat, to close loops. We sent one to the volunteer fire company with a check and a simple line. "For the next porch someone can't reach." We sent one to the tenants to inform them how rent would be handled during the transition. Clear, respectful, no surprises. We sent one to Mrs. Dobson to thank her for testifying and tucked in a gift card to the market, because dignity isn't just about courtrooms. Spring came hard and honest that year, the way Maine springs do when winter pretends it will never end and then surrenders all at once. I was in the front yard when the first crocus pushed up like a small purple truth. Lila came outside with her jacket half-zipped and her hair in an elastic I recognized from the drawer in the hall. "Mom," she said, "I got an email." She looked as if she'd been chosen for something and punished for it in the same sentence. "What is it?" I asked. "It's from the County Elder Resource Center," she said. "They're starting a fund to help seniors in housing disputes, and they want you to consider being on the advisory council. It's a small stipend and a lot of responsibility and—" She trailed off because she didn't know the word for what she was asking. "And it's a chance to turn pain into something useful," I said. "We can name it." We named it Route 14 Dignity because places teach you how to stand up. The first time the council met, we sat in a library room that smelled like dust and good intentions. We drew up a list of small, practical interventions that could make a large dignity difference. Rent escrow accounts so a landlord couldn't pocket money while ignoring repairs. vouchers for lock changes when adult children returned uninvited and angry, a monthly clinic where someone like Marisol explained, free of charge, what a power of attorney is and what it isn't. A month later, an older man came into the clinic wearing a navy hat that looked as tired as he did. He had a shut-off notice folded in quarters so tightly it looked like origami. "I don't open mail anymore," he said to me out on the porch, voice low. "It's always bad news. If you're scared to open your mail, we can open it with you," I told him. "I've opened a lot of envelopes in my life." The paper inside is never bigger than your next step. We unfolded the notice. We called the utility. We arranged the payment. He cried without making a sound and handed me a butterscotch candy from his pocket like gratitude was something you could unwrap and share, which it is. Not everything went the way I wanted. Trent filed a civil suit against the partnership for wrongful termination. He lost. He appealed and lost again. He sent a letter through a lawyer demanding visitation with his child that had not yet been born. The law is a mirror. It reflects what you bring to it. He brought rage and entitlement and a spreadsheet. We brought facts and care and the long memory of a town. In the end, he worked his way out of our weather. The next person to surprise me was the judge. He sent a note on courthouse letterhead that said, simply, "If you ever want to have coffee without affidavits, my wife makes a banana bread that has convinced me there is a benevolent God." He signed it with his first name and drew a tiny doodle of a gavel at the bottom, as if he were embarrassed by what he wrote and wanted the drawing to distract me. We did have coffee, not right away, because justice is a boundary before it is a friendship, but later, on a bench by the water, while his wife read and we watched a boy chase a gull he never had any hope of catching. He told me the things you tell a person you owe your life to without getting too sentimental about it. I told him I didn't kick the door down alone. A neighbor woman hit it with a crowbar until the wood gave. He said he never knew that. I told him most rescue stories have a second pair of hands no one writes down. I'd be lying if I said I never got angry again. There are mornings when I pour from the kettle and think about the day Lila packed my mother's locket without looking at my face. I still have sharp words stored in a drawer no one needs to open. But anger is like strong coffee in the afternoon. It keeps you up past the hour you meant to sleep if you let it. The night Lila went into labor, I woke to a sound that wasn't the sound, but had everything in it. Breathing that missed beats, a mom said, in a way that makes you come down the hall faster than a person your age should. It was late summer. The house was hot. I threw on the first sweater I found, and we drove to the hospital with the windows down because the air felt like it belonged to us. She squeezed my hand until my rings hurt. I told her what I told 100 women over 100 days on my route, even when they didn't ask. You can do this because you're already doing this. She had a son, as dawn lit the parking lot, like a truth. She named him Nate. When the nurse put him in my arms, he scrunched his face like every newborn who has ever wanted to object to the light. He was so small and so obviously himself. I stopped worrying for 3 full breaths. Then I started again because that's part of the job. Trent did try to make trouble, through letters, through a lawyer with better hair than sense, through a voicemail Lila saved and then deleted out of respect for her own ears. The court established what it could. The rest belonged to the rest of us, boundaries enforced by locks and friends, and the kind of town where people watch and call it neighborly instead of nosy because they love you. We ended up renewing the ground lease on the Bayside storefronts. No one wanted to touch the wavy brick one because someone once said it was cursed, and people in towns like ours will pick up a superstition faster than a sale. We took it anyway. It houses our Route 14 Dignity office now. I put a bulletin board out front that says in plain letters, "If you're scared to open your mail, we'll open it with you." Folks laugh and then come in. We keep a jar of free pens on the counter shaped like a mailbox for the joke of it. Once a woman stood at the door and didn't come in. She looked like a person who had been told no in ways that made her believe the word belonged to her. "Can I?" she asked, voice gravelly like a road no one maintains. "Yes," I said before she finished. "You can." Inside, I taught her how to read a lease like a person who is allowed to say this line isn't fair and cross it out before she signs. We called her landlord together. We didn't yell. We pointed to the part with the broken sink and the promise to fix it. The sink was fixed by Tuesday. She brought me a magnet for my fridge with a photo of a lighthouse you could tell wasn't ours because the sky behind it was too calm. I put it right next to a drawing Nate made of a stick woman holding a stick child's hand. Underneath, he'd written Grandma in letters that could be read two ways, and both were correct. 5 years after the hearing, Harbor Point felt the same and different the way a person does when you love them long enough. Some buildings had new paint, some had old kindness. People in the bakery still argued about who made the best whoopie pies as if we didn't all know it was a tie. The judge retired and grew a beard too young for his age, and then shaved it because his wife told him it made him look like he was hiding something. He brought his granddaughter to the office one afternoon, and she pressed her face against the front glass and wrote her name with her finger on her breath fog, while he smiled like a man who knows what it's like to be held by a person who once dragged you out of smoke. At home, the hydrangeas still bloomed in a way that made me believe some things return just because they're stubborn. The blue mug chipped a little more and then clung to the line. The ledger sat on a shelf in the hallway, not put away because it wasn't a thing to hide, not displayed because it wasn't a trophy. It was there like a suggestion you can take or leave. Keep records of your kindness. You'll need them on days people forget you have a spine. At Thanksgiving that 5th year, Lila brought 2 pies she made herself, even though I would have accepted one with the crust from a store. She placed them on the table like offerings and then pulled the loose drawer all the way out and sanded the side even though there were carrots on the cutting board, and a point at which doing one thing is clearly better than 2. I watched her and thought of the girl who had packed my life into a box, and the woman who learned to label and lift her own boxes since. She caught me looking and rolled her eyes in the old teenage way, and then smiled because some habits can be played with when they no longer hurt. After dinner, she asked me a question I'd been keeping an answer for and tucking it away and then taking it out to turn in the light. "Have you forgiven me?" she said. I looked at her face and saw all of them. The 8-year-old with flour on her cheek, the kid with the first heartbreak, the woman who let a man talk over the part of her that knew better, the mother whose hand now reached without asking to steady her own child on a step he would have taken without falling. "Yes," I said, "I forgive you. But more important, I see you forgiving yourself," she cried, and then we were done crying. And then we both cried again, because that's one way mothers and daughters say hello, when they mean, "We've been here all along." Later that winter, a letter arrived addressed to me with a return address from a place in the capital where people meet to make rules and sometimes accidentally make lives better. It invited me to a small ceremony where they give out a small plaque and shake the hands of people who turn their own pain into something useful. I read it twice and set it on the table, without thinking about the irony of a life in which you never expect your name on an envelope, and then have to decide whether to read it now or after your tea. I made tea and read it again. I said yes. They asked me to say a few words. I stood at a podium that made a sound like settling wood and held the paper Marisol had printed for me, because she knew I would forget my own name when the room went quiet. I did not talk long. I told them that the door I kicked when I was in my 20s did not stay kicked. I learned I had to hold it with my shoulder and ask a neighbor to wedge a crowbar, and then I learned to prop it with a chair so someone else could walk through. I told them that not all rescues happen in smoke. Most happen in kitchens where a woman says no and then makes coffee. I told them that if you carry letters long enough, you start to act like one. You are an arrival. You are something someone has been waiting for. You are also not the only thing in the mailbox. The day after, I went back to Harbor Point and watered the hydrangeas and scraped the ice off the step and said hello to Mrs. Dobson, who still leaves her porch light on more than she needs to and tells me proudly she's working on it. Nate, 6 then and slow to take off his jacket, drew on my grocery list and asked me to tell the story where I saved the judge. I told it the way you tell children the truth in pieces they can hold. I ran toward the fire because someone had to, and then I ran back when the door didn't open the first time. I told him I looked for other hands, and I found them. He nodded the serious nod kids use when they decide to remember a thing on purpose. Every once in a while, I still see Trent across a parking lot or far down a street in a different town. He looks smaller, not because time shrinks us, but because consequence does. I don't look away. I don't say hello. I don't carry around a grudge that would keep my mug empty. I carry my mug. It's enough. People sometimes ask me how you stand up at 71 when someone tells you to sit down. I tell them it's like lifting a heavy package. You don't bend at the spine, you bend at the knees. You bring the weight close. You make sure your feet are under you. And when it's too much for one person, you ask for help. We aren't meant to carry alone. That's not weakness. That's design. On the evening that marks 5 years to the day since the hearing, I sit at the kitchen table with my tea cooling and the light doing that pretty thing it does when it touches dust and makes a room look like it's wearing jewelry. Outside, the street is a string of porch lights, each one an announcement and a prayer. Lila is on the phone in the next room, not whispering because she doesn't have to. Nate is in the yard, boots muddy, holding a flashlight and trying to make an X out of 2 beams, even though that's not how light works. He shouts through the window, "Grandma, come see." I pick up the blue mug, which fits my hand because my hand learned it, and I go to the door. As I pass the hallway shelf, I touch the ledger without taking it down. It sits there not as a threat or a trophy, but as a reminder that records matter. So does noticing. The ocean breathes in and out. I flip the porch light on as I step outside. It's not dark yet. It doesn't need to be. I do it anyway. When I reach the yard, Nate shows me the way his beams meet and overflow. He looks up at me like he's done something impossible, and maybe he has. That's what light does when you aren't scared of the switch. He asks for the story one more time, and I tell it again, with the same beginning and the same middle and an ending that keeps right on happening. I tell him how the judge froze and then remembered a woman who didn't leave when the heat rose. I tell him kindness circles back in ways that aren't luck. I tell him the quiet part out loud, that doors open because you push and because other people push with you. He nods like a boy who is storing truth in a drawer he'll be able to open when he needs it. He runs back across the yard, beam swinging wild, boots making the sound of a life that will have its own hearings and ledgers and porch lights. I stand there a second longer and breathe the salt in, and for a moment it feels like the whole town is breathing with me. Inside, the kettle ticks on the stove as it cools, and I think of every kitchen in Harbor Point where a woman is drawing a boundary with a voice that doesn't have to raise to be heard. I sit back at the table. I take my list for tomorrow and add a few things to the bottom after the eggs and the bread and the stamps, because old habits make it easy to add kindness next to groceries. Call Mrs. Dobson's nephew about the ramp, drop off the form for the Veterans Clinic, pick up more pens for the Route 14 jar. I underline the last item twice. I've learned to keep a spare on hand for the people who don't think they can write their names. Sometimes I still hear the judge's voice like a photograph in my head, the way he said, "It's her," that first morning. I know now it wasn't about me as much as it was about memory deciding to get out of the way of truth. It felt like a spotlight then. It feels like a porch light now, one more in a line down our street, steady and ordinary and necessary. I've always liked ordinary. Ordinary is what most of us are until the day a door needs kicking. And when it opens, if you're the kind of person who notices, you keep your hand on it until the next person is through. The blue mug leaves a ring on the table. I wipe it away with my sleeve. The hydrangeas are almost done for the season, brown edging what used to be blue, and I let them be beautiful anyway. In the hall, the ledger rests. I leave it there. I don't need it tonight. Some nights, the only evidence you need is the sound of your own house making old sounds around you, and the feeling that the floor is the floor, and the knowledge that if you ever forget any of it, someone will knock, and you will open the door.